When a man catches a glimpse of truth, it is like standing at the edge of a great mountain. The sky is clear, the air feels divine, and in that moment he believes he has arrived. But this is the first trap. The moment of awakening feels like a peak, but it is not the mountain, it is only the first step into the unknown. You see, what most people call awakening is just a disturbance in their sleep. A light enters, and for a moment they are shaken. But instead of walking deeper, they start celebrating as if the journey is done. That is where motivation begins to fade. Why? Because the ego, which had worn many masks, now wears a spiritual one. It whispers, "You are awakened now. You are beyond the ordinary." And the very fire that once pushed you to seek now begins to cool in the comfort of that illusion. There is a strange silence after awakening, not the silence of peace, but the silence of emptiness. It is not what the mind expected. No fireworks, no applause, just a vast stillness that feels uninteresting to the one addicted to stimulation. Motivation dies because desire dies. You no longer want what others want. You don't chase power, fame, or even success. And because desire was your fuel, now your engine stalls. But this is not a problem. It is grace. When motivation fades, it is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of real transition. You are no longer moved by fire. You are being pulled by space. You are no longer chasing life. You are being lived, but the mind will resist. It will say, "You are losing your spark." No, you are losing your friction. True transformation begins not with effort, but with surrender. Not with motivation, but with devotion. Not with trying harder, but by being utterly still. Aware, alert, open. If you have tasted that light and now feel lost in the dark, don't panic. You are not falling behind. You are simply entering the depth where light no longer blinds and truth no longer excites. It simply is. Walk gently, let the fire of motivation die, and something deeper than fire will begin to burn, something eternal. When that first glimpse of something beyond the ordinary touches you, it feels like a breakthrough, a moment of clarity, of inner expansion. It may happen in meditation, in nature, in silence, or sometimes for no reason at all. Suddenly, the burdens of the past seem to drop, the noise of the mind fades, and you feel light, alive, and deeply present. In that moment, you feel as though you have arrived, you feel complete. This is the illusion. That peak moment is powerful, yes, but it is not the end. It is not even the middle. It is just a doorway, a glimpse, a trailer, not the movie. But the problem is, most people fall in love with that one moment and try to live off its memory. They build beliefs around it, they decorate it, they chase it again and again, hoping to recreate what was never meant to be repeated in the same way. You see, when the light first comes, it blinds you in a beautiful way. You feel euphoric, expanded, almost untouchable, but this is not transformation. It is only exposure, like opening a window for the first time in a dark room. The light rushes in, and for a moment, everything looks different. But unless you step through the window and walk into the unknown, nothing truly changes. The mountain peak is not meant for settling. It is meant to show you what is possible. The air is pure, yes, but life is not lived at the peak. Life happens when you come down and walk through the valleys, the forests, the shadows, and the storms. Those who mistake that moment of awakening as the destination often lose motivation when the high fades. They think something is wrong, but nothing is wrong. The high was a glimpse. Now the real work begins, not in chasing more light, but in learning to walk in clarity, even when the light is not dazzling. To awaken is not to arrive, it is to begin. After that initial awakening, something subtle yet powerful begins to happen. The ego, which has always found ways to define and reinforce itself, does not simply disappear. It changes form. It puts on a new robe, one that looks spiritual, pure, even enlightened. Instead of saying, "I am better than others because of my possessions," now it says, "I am beyond others because I have awakened." This is the most dangerous game the ego plays, because now it hides in the very thing that was meant to dissolve it. The old ego wanted power, status, identity. The new ego wants to be known as wise, evolved, awakened. And because this identity feels more subtle and refined, we rarely question it. We begin to speak differently, dress differently, act with a calmness that is not always genuine, but performative. We play the part of someone who has seen the truth, while within, the same fear and longing still operate, just in more silent ways, and this is why the motivation to grow begins to vanish. When the ego convinces you that you've already reached the peak, why would you climb any higher? Why seek when you've already claimed the title of a seeker who has found the hunger to learn, to be shattered, to be vulnerable? That hunger begins to dry up, not because the truth is absent, but because the ego has cleverly told you you are already there. But real awakening is not a conclusion. It is a collapse. The collapse of identity, including the identity of being awakened. If that collapse hasn't happened, then you are still playing. And in this play, motivation fades not because your path is complete, but because your mind has settled for a lie dressed as truth. The ego doesn't die when the light comes. It often hides in the shadow of that very light. And until one sees this, the journey pauses, stuck in a spiritual image instead of real inner evolution. When awakening touches a person, it often brings with it a deep stillness. The racing thoughts slow down, the inner noise quiets, and for a time there is peace, real, tangible peace. But soon, that peace begins to feel empty, not peaceful empty, but hollow empty, and this is where confusion begins. People expect awakening to be filled with light, love, ecstasy, something overwhelming and beautiful. And yes, sometimes it begins that way, but true awareness, when it deepens, does not offer constant fireworks. It offers clarity, it offers silence, it removes the layers of drama, and when those layers fall away, what remains is often not excitement, but space. This space feels too open for the mind, too quiet, too still. The very same mind that once craved freedom now finds itself uneasy in the presence of it. There is no stimulation, no story, no goal, no emotional high. And in this absence, the person feels something is wrong. They say, I don't feel motivated anymore, because the old sources of excitement, the chase, the ambition, the thrill, have faded. But this emptiness is not a mistake. It is a mirror. It reflects to you that most of your energy was not based on love for life, but addiction to movement. When the movement stops, you feel dead, but you are not dead. You are just meeting yourself without decoration, without distraction. Real awareness is like sitting in a vast sky with nothing to hold on to. For the mind, this is terrifying. It feels like a void. But for the one who truly looks deeper, it is not a void. It is freedom. Not the freedom to do anything, but the freedom to simply be without needing to become. Yet, before that realization matures, there is a phase, a dry, silent phase, where everything feels dull, uninteresting, even depressing. This is not the darkness of failure, it is the womb of transformation. But because it lacks the thrill of the earlier awakening moment, most people run back into noise, thinking something was lost. Nothing was lost. Only the illusion was taken away, and what remains is the real beginning. Motivation, for most people, is simply desire in disguise. The desire to become something, to achieve something, to escape something. It is not born of clarity, it is born of craving. You may call it ambition, purpose, drive, but underneath, it is the hunger to be more than what you are right now, and this hunger is what fuels most action in the world. But what happens when awakening strikes? Suddenly, many of those desires begin to dissolve. You no longer chase things with the same desperation. Fame, power, validation, even relationships, everything begins to lose its grip. You see through the game, and in that seeing, the engine that once drove your life begins to slow down. Now this creates a strange dilemma. You feel lighter, yes, but also less driven. You are calmer, but also less interested in chasing anything. And because you were always taught that life is about goals, hustle, effort, you start to think something is wrong with you. You say, where is my fire, where is my passion? But the truth is, something is not wrong. Something is maturing. You are beginning to move from a life driven by wanting into a life guided by being. You are no longer reaching out to complete yourself. You are beginning to taste completeness within. And this completeness does not scream, it does not push, it does not chase, it simply exists fully. Yet the mind cannot understand this, because the mind equates stillness with stagnation and effortlessness with laziness. So it fights. It tries to reignite the old motivation by returning to old desires, but they no longer taste the same. The fire is gone, not because you are lost, but because you are waking up from the fire itself. This is the death of artificial motivation, and it is the birth of a deeper movement, not born from wanting more, but from seeing more. A movement not fueled by fear or fantasy, but by truth, and truth does not run. It simply stands and shines. Awakening is often imagined as a joyful explosion of clarity, a doorway into eternal bliss. And yes, it may begin with light, but that very light reveals things most people are not prepared to see. It shows you the truth not only of existence, but of your own illusions, attachments, and identities. And this kind of seeing is not always pleasant. In fact, it can be deeply unsettling. You begin to notice the impermanence of everything, your thoughts, your emotions, your relationships, even your sense of self. Everything you once clung to as me or mine starts to look fragile, temporary, unreal. This is not the bliss the spiritual books promised. This is raw clarity, and clarity can cut. You begin to feel alone, not because people have left, but because you are no longer lost in them. The drama, the roles, the emotional games, they no longer grip you. And what remains is a strange aloneness, not loneliness, but the realization that ultimately you walk alone within yourself. This, too, is part of awakening. But the mind, which was expecting constant bliss, now feels disappointed. It says, "Where is the joy? Where is the magic?" It does not understand that what you are seeing now is reality stripped of illusions, and reality, when seen without filters, is not always comforting. It is simply true. This is when many people feel their motivation fading, because what once moved them, emotions, goals, relationships, now feels shallow, but what is deeper has not yet stabilized. So they are suspended in a space between old illusions and new truths. Between who they were and what they are becoming, it feels like darkness, but it is not the darkness of ignorance. It is the darkness of transition. The sun has set on the old self, but the new light has not yet fully risen. In that in-between space, motivation wanes not because something is lost, but because something deeper is being born. Something not driven by hope or fear, but by presence and stillness. Until that settles, there is discomfort. And when motivation fades after awakening, most people panic. They try to reignite the fire, push themselves, look for new goals or passions. But what they don't realize is that they are being invited into a different way of living, a way not powered by ambition or urgency, but by quiet presence and natural alignment. You see, before awakening, action is mostly reaction. We do things to prove ourselves, to fix something, to gain something, to escape something. But after a certain inner clarity begins to bloom, that restlessness starts to dissolve, not because you become lazy, but because you are no longer compelled by unconscious forces. Now, instead of being pushed by desire, there's an opportunity to be pulled by something subtler, something like inner stillness or what some may call devotion. Not devotion to a person or belief, but to life itself, to the truth, to the moment. This kind of devotion does not burn like passion, it hums like silence. It is not dramatic, it is steady, but because this movement is so quiet, the mind doesn't recognize it as motivation. It says, "I'm doing nothing, I'm stuck." No, you are simply not chasing anymore. You are listening. You are allowing yourself to be moved rather than constantly moving. This shift requires deep trust. Because everything you've been taught says you must push, strive, hustle. But now the invitation is to align. To act not from need but from clarity, not from fear but from truth. It is here that a different kind of intelligence begins to move through you, not mental but existential. You find yourself saying what needs to be said, doing what needs to be done without strain. Life flows not as a task, but as a response to the moment. When the old fire of motivation dies, don't try to bring it back. Sit still, watch, wait, let something deeper emerge, and when it does, it won't come as excitement, it will come as knowing, it will come as stillness that walks. In this journey of awakening, we often expect light, joy, and endless motivation. But the truth is far deeper, and often darker, than the surface reveals. The initial burst of clarity is only the beginning, not the destination. The ego cleverly hides behind the mask of awakening. The mind struggles with the vast emptiness that true awareness brings, and the familiar fires of desire and motivation quietly fade away. This fading is not failure. It is a sacred invitation, an invitation to move beyond chasing and striving, beyond identity and illusion, into a space of pure being. It is in this stillness, this surrender, that true transformation happens. When motivation dies, something far more profound is born, the silent, steady flame of presence, devotion, and clarity. So if you find yourself lost in the quiet after the light, do not fear. You are not falling behind or losing your way. You are entering the real path of awakening, the path where life is no longer a race to the peak, but a gentle, endless unfolding. Embrace the darkness, trust the silence, and allow yourself to be carried by the deeper current that moves not with force, but with grace.